Welcome to Unpacked, the podcast that examines how technology is reshaping business and our world. This season we're focusing on generative AI. My name's Stuart Black, and I'm joined by the voice of the show, Think Tank's innovation lead, Arvind Ravishankar. So Arvind, how have you been since last time we spoke?
Oh, Stuart, fantastic. Weather's awesome still in California. Been raining a bit, but I think we needed that. So enjoying the weather, the cooling of the seasons, and yeah, looking forward to talking more AI.
Okay, I'm jealous as always because here it's pitch black, pouring with rain, typical London weather, midwinter. What can you do? I'll have to pop out there one day and we'll do this together.
We should do the show live, and you should just fly over to California one day.
It's a deal. The next one, I'm there. Sounds fantastic. In a few moments then, we're going to hear your deep dive interview with Greg LaBlanc, who's a lecturer at Berkeley and Stanford. Can you tell us a little bit about this one and why is it so special for you?
So Greg is, I would say, one of the most insightful humans I've ever met in my life. His brain works at a hyper speed, and he processes information like nobody I've ever seen before. And so when you listen to this episode, I am going to highlight some insights that come out of the episode, but almost everything he says is insightful. That's the amazing part. Now, his specialization is transformation. And so he's going to talk to us about how AI will transform industries and how industries need to prepare for this transformation.
Okay, I mean, that's a great pitch. I can't wait to hear it. But before we get to that, let's take a quick look at a couple of interesting things happening around the world of AI. Our first story today looks at an AI-powered RoboCop that's been deployed in New York's Times Square 42nd Street subway station. The robot's called K5, and he looks a little bit like a Roomba on steroids, if you ask me. And he's being used partly for surveillance, partly as a deterrent. People are going to see him and maybe not do the things they were going to do, is the idea, I guess. It will be accompanied by a human partner, but the machine is powered by artificial intelligence, and it's going to detect and record out of the ordinary activity, which I don't know how you decide what's out of the ordinary in a New York subway station. I guess we'll see how that pans out. The makers say the aim here is to supplement existing security measures, but Arvind, does it make you nervous, or do you think this is policing of the future that we need to get used to?
You know, Stuart, honestly, when the first time you said AI-powered RoboCop, alarm bells went off for me in my head. But when you followed up by saying that it will be accompanied by a human being, then all the alarm bells kind of went down for me. And the reason I say this is because today I don't think AI is as intelligent as a human being, and it should not be put in situations where critical decisions are being made, right? Like, for example, in the case of safety, it's a very critical decision. And so in those situations, you shouldn't have AI making those decisions. However, there are a set of capabilities that AI has that no human being has. For example, in that New York subway station, if the AI has 360-degree vision, it can process a ton of more information than a human can, right? Not only can it process information, immediately it can recognize faces, voices, noises, right? So the amount of information it processes is a lot more. And so it will be able to detect things that a human being won't be able to detect. But finally, making the decision of what do you do with that information is something only a human being should be doing, right? So if it's an AI-powered RoboCop, but a human making the decisions on what it should do, and it's really think of it like a canine unit, right? So a human being and a dog, right? They make such a powerful unit because dogs have skills that humans don't have, right? And so that's how I look at it. I almost look at it as a canine unit where it's an AI and a human being together. In those situations, I am a lot more comfortable because I know the streets will be safer, and I also know that there's a human being who's making the decision and not AI.
Well, maybe the Holy Trinity would be a human, a robot, and a dog, and we'll get Tom Hanks in the movie, and it will be a big one.
Oh, I love that.
Speaking of
I love
RoboDogs,
that.
though,
That's perfect.
speaking of RoboDogs, the NYPD did test the Boston Dynamics RoboDog. Had a short run, but the public found it just too weird and dystopian, so they ended up cancelling it. So you have that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, AI is being used to track problems such as fare evasion in a much more invisible way. So I wonder what you think is the best approach for making this kind of technology feel useful and friendly rather than intimidating.
This is where I think what companies should be paying attention to closely is design and design principles, right? So there's a whole field of anthropology, ethnography. There are design companies like IDEO, Frog, Doblin, and they specialize in understanding how humans feel, how humans react to situations and things. And so you just can't blanket take a technology and deploy it into the market. You got to understand how a human would react to it. And so as long as you have good ethnographers, anthropologists, designers within your team as an enterprise company, like even with the AI powered in Boston Dynamics, how can you make it more appealable to a human being, right? I think that's really important, especially for AI that's on your face. You want to make sure that it is human friendly. So I would say make sure you have a designer on your team who understands human behavior and human psychology.
Okay, great point. Our second story today is about the impact of marrying artificial intelligence on the one hand with edge devices that are currently connected or connecting to 5G. This combination will add a new real-time dimension to AI applications. One example in the piece is healthcare, where surgeons will be able to make quicker, life-saving decisions. So we can see the importance of that real-time function there. Arvind, this story has huge implications for industries where response time is critical: manufacturing, logistics, business, healthcare. What's your take on how this is going to make a difference?
I think it's going to make a huge difference, Stuart. But let's take a step back for a quick minute to make sure everybody understands the difference between edge and not edge. Like, what is the meaning of edge, right? So edge essentially is how the proximity of processing to an end application, right? So that is what is the edge. So for example, you have a camera in front of you right now and you're talking to it, and the processing of information in that camera could either happen in a remote server in the cloud, like 100 miles away, or it could happen right in front of you inside the camera locally, right? So that's the difference between edge and cloud. And so in situations that you're talking about, if you can actually integrate artificial intelligence type processing within the edge device, it's going to be able to make decisions a lot more faster. Latency, that's the word for it. A lot more faster. So you hit the nail on the head. The real reason to put AI in these devices is that it can make decisions a lot faster. But the story isn't as simple, right? And the reason for that is because of cost. It is very expensive to put AI at the edge. So as you look at these, while the potential is tremendous, you got to make those trade-offs as a business to understand how expensive is it going to be for me to put AI on those edge devices, and what are the use cases which warrant that kind of latency.
Right.
And that's going to be your early starting points, right? Not every manufacturing or not every use case on the edge is going to require that speed in processing. So it's a trade-off between speed and cost.
Okay, that sounds like really important caveats to mention. So Arvind, can you tell us a little bit more about today's interview? The key topic is AI transformation with Greg LaBlanc. Can you just give us some headlines before we head into that?
Yes, Stuart. A lot of people think that when these new technologies come out, that the transformation is about the product or the transformation is about the use case. What they don't understand is that some technologies are fundamentally going to transform everything. They're going to transform how you're organized as a company. They're going to transform how the skills you're deploying. They're going to transform how you get to your customers. We saw digital do that, right? When data and digital came in, it transformed not just products and services, but how companies are organized and how industries operate. AI is going to do the same thing. So paying very close attention to not just the technology, but really understanding how it's going to transform your entire industry and the way you live your life and do business is really important. And so that's what I'm going to dive into with Greg.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. We're going to take a quick break now and then come back with Arvind's interview with Greg LaBlanc. Our think tank focuses on researching emerging technologies that will shape your future. From generative AI to exoskeletons, we study the impact these technologies will have on business, humanity, and our planet. And through our podcast, newsletters, and social media content, we have a direct line to a truly global emerging technology community. So if you'd like to find out more about the impact these technologies will have on your business, then reach out to our team at lab45thinktank.com.
Transformation is painful. Transformation takes what we know and what we thought relevant and makes it irrelevant. It also takes things we did not know and make it relevant. However, transformation is very important because without transformation, there is no evolution. And without evolution, there is no human progress. Today, we are at the brink or the early stages of a new transformation. It's called artificial intelligence. What does this transformation mean? What should we expect from it? How should we prepare for it? To answer these questions, today we're going to unpack AI transformation. And joining me is a very special guest. He's a professor at UC Berkeley. He's been teaching courses at UC Berkeley for the last 15 years in the areas of competitive strategy and digital transformation. He has won numerous awards for teaching, and he also teaches at Stanford and HEC Paris on these topics of artificial intelligence, transformation, strategy, and leadership. Beyond his academic career, he also consults with the leading Fortune companies all over the world in the area of strategy and leadership. He has a passion for evolutionary biology, which makes his strategic thinking even more special. And he's the host of his own podcast called Unsiloed. I'm super proud to bring our guest today and introduce you to Greg LaBlanc, who was my professor and is now my mentor and great friend. Hi, Greg.
Great to see you, Arvind.
Lovely to have you on our podcast today.
So, yeah, it's fun to be on the other side of the podcast microphone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, Greg, before we dive into this topic of unpacking transformation and AI transformation in particular, would love to hear about what drew you into this field of strategy and transformation, and what drew you to teach these subjects?
Well, I want to start by challenging the initial premise, which is that transformation is uncomfortable, right? I think that for some people, transformation is exciting, right? It's challenging. And I think what drew me to this topic is kind of what drew me to all of the topics that I've been teaching throughout my career, which is, curiosity and excitement about learning, right?
So, Greg, according to you, what is transformation and what constitutes to a transformation?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a metaphysical question, right? I was trained as an historian, and historians used to sort themselves into lumpers and splitters, right? Or folks who would look for continuities and folks who would look for discontinuities, right? So the great historians of the Annales school in France, they would emphasize what they call kind of the longue durée, meaning, these long-term trends. And then others would be more inclined to say, everything's new. And so we're seeing that happen right now, right, with the digital transformations taking place. You can say, everything's new, everything has to be changed. This is something that we've never seen before. And then there's others who are saying, yeah, this is not that much different from the sorts of things that we have seen, happen to us in the past. And so, I kind of toggle back and forth between those two different perspectives, depending on who I'm trying to convince. So for the folks who say there's nothing new, I usually emphasize what's new. And for those who over exaggerate what's new, I try to emphasize the continuities.
What I find interesting is that if you take this AI paradigm that's currently ongoing, most businesses were not paying close attention to the transformer architecture, or they weren't paying close attention to artificial intelligence to the way they are right now. And because I don't know if you could have actually predicted chat GPT's rise. I don't know if you could, right? So in situations like that, where you really can't predict, how does an organization behave? And have you seen that before?
Well, let's just to focus narrowly on artificial intelligence. We can also do the continuous discontinuous story, right? So
Mhm.
every time there's a new discovery in the world of artificial intelligence, people say, now's the time. This is AI. It's just like, and when I read these accounts, ever since ChatGPT, ever since generative AI became more successful, everyone's like, this is going to change everything. It's like, well, you know what? Back in 2015 with neural nets, right? Everyone's like, yes, AI finally, right? So you can tell a story that where this is something that is completely new, or you can say, no, this is a continuation of this series of discoveries that have been happening right in the world of artificial intelligence for the last couple of decades.
And Greg, when you reflect on those revolutions, are there some learnings you think that our enterprise leaders should be paying attention to or can take away from those?
The technology diffuses rapidly. What doesn't diffuse as rapidly are these, managerial techniques, these organizational architectural innovations. And that's this also the reason why, these older companies have a difficult time adapting, because once you create these relationships and these structures, they take on a life of their own, and they resist
Hmm,
change. They resist um, the kinds of transformations that they would need to undertake in order to enable the new technologies.
that's interesting, Greg. So it almost feels like the number one hurdle of any transformation is fear, right? That's the inherent insecurities of individuals and the organization, the fear that you could become irrelevant. That's the resistance, right, for change. Um, how have you seen organizations build those structures and break that sort of pattern so that they can adapt to the change? Have you seen organizations do that?
Well, I think fear is plays a role, but it's not the complete story, right? People may not be afraid of losing their position. So, there is that element where leaders have to suppress the fear. But the flip side of that is they also have to offer them some kind of excitement, right?
Mm,
You can't just say, okay, no more fear, because what's left when you get rid of fear is blankness, right? You also have to get people, excited about embracing the new, right? And sometimes that means carrots, sometimes that means sticks, sometimes
mm.
that means vision, right?
Got it. So, Greg, I want to dig a little deeper into what you just said a few minutes ago, where in these different transformations, the technology is not really the problem. It's the organizational structure, the way human beings function. Um, as you look at this foreseeable transformation in AI, do you see those organizational structures change? Because I hear, there's a lot of talk and there are visions of artificial intelligence starting to run parts of companies, not just augment, not just augment routine tasks, but even start making decisions, right? So, how do you see that unfold? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, look, even before generative AI, just let's go back a bit to, more primitive forms of machine learning. You can think about the adoption of various machine learning initiatives, and the ones that have been the easiest to adopt are the ones that perform some relatively narrow task,
Mm,
right? So suppose you're in HR and you're doing hiring, and someone comes up with a product that helps you to process more applications more quickly, right? Well, this is great. So, you can see how that's going to save you money, right? So if you're a cost center, reduce my costs, right? You can see if you're in marketing and someone comes along and says, hey, I got this great tool that'll help you to figure out who you should be targeting with your marketing, right? wow, this is great. I'm a revenue center. I've just boosted my revenue, right? So all of those specific applications are actually relatively unproblematic. Yes, there will be people who will resist it.
The more we discuss this, Greg, the more you're convincing me that organizational structure is going to be the number one most important thing in this AI transformation, right? Because I think something you said was it was so insightful. If the data resides in two parts of the organization, then you may have the best AI algorithms, you may have the best foundation models that you've bought, but if they don't have access to that data, and if they can't work on the two organizations' data, then you're not going to be able to get those insights. Versus companies that are AI native, who are beginning this journey with wanting to be AI companies, they're going to organize the companies to get the data, right? Versus the companies today will have to reorganize themselves. Because, when a couple of projects that I've done in consulting, I have found that the silos in organizations are everywhere, right?
Mhm.
And those silos really they are people's personal agendas creating those silos. So it feels like paying attention to your organizational structure and also paying attention to how data sits in your organization is going to be really critical in this new AI world.
Absolutely. And right, to get back to this idea of analytics versus data, these new tools, at the end of the day, they're gonna be commodified, right? The tools are always get commodified. The intellectual property around these tools is very weak,
Mm,
right? So your competitive advantage is always going to come from the data. It's never going to come from your analytics tools. Now, your analytics capabilities, of course, are can be an advantage, but generally that's a temporary advantage because every organization is going to ultimately adopt these types of tools sooner or later. I mean, the ones that don't will go bankrupt, right? So at the
true.
end of the day, you will be competing against other companies that have right world class analytics teams that are using cutting edge algorithms. So the only way that you can really carve out a sustainable competitive advantage is to make sure that you have procured access to a continuous stream of data, of proprietary data. And so that means two things. And this is, when I evaluate companies, I mean, I'm always looking, what is your strategy for acquiring data? Okay. And then what is your strategy for making sure that no one else can acquire that same data? Because if they can acquire that same data or have access to that same, sensor point, capture point, then you're just a commodity. Right. And,
No,
and
that's
we
a
know we
great
know what happens to you when you're selling a commodity. I mean, you don't make any money.
That's a great point, Greg. Greg, I want to unpack this a little, right? Because you're getting into AI strategy, and this is super interesting. So I want to just unpack what you just said and humor me a bit here. So if I have access to unique data, then I can take cutting edge algorithms and train them on that data, giving me a competitive edge. So then, would these algorithms then become the competitive edge by definition? Or do you still see the data as a competitive edge, right?
So, there's the naked algorithm and there's the clothed algorithm, right?
Mm,
The naked
mm,
algorithm prior to any kind of data ingestion, right, is just a tool,
mhm,
right? It doesn't have
mm.
any
Got
it,
it.
it it doesn't do anything. Right?
Yep,
It's like
yep,
it's
yep.
it's like it's like a baby, right? A baby's born and it has all the brain cells and it has all the potential neuronal connections. And but when you look at a baby, you're like, well, what can a baby do, right? It can't do anything. You got to train up the baby, and then boom, you have Michael Jordan, right? Okay, right. And so when you look at Michael Jordan, is it is he great because of his experience and his training, or is it because of his abilities? Now,
That's
imagine that
true.
every single baby is born with the same natural talent as Michael Jordan. Then who's going to win? It's going to be whoever has the best training data, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
so you're right and you're wrong in the sense that when you think of the algorithm, the naked algorithm, anybody can buy these things off the shelf. Anybody can grab anything they want. If you don't have any data to train a model on, the model's just it's like a computer with no with no apps on it, right? It's useless.
no, it's totally true. And Greg, so this what it tells me is that So there are companies that are sitting on treasure troves of unique data, right? And then there are companies that have no data. So those companies that have no data today, do you think they're going to be pretty much similar to the companies that dropped off from the S&P list during digital transformation era? Do you think those companies are going to go out of business, or is there a way for those companies to become relevant?
Well, look, I mean, there are still people that do things that are valuable, right? You could be an oil company and, you've got special access to Saudi, if you're Aramco. Aramco's not going to go out of business, even if they don't have a data strategy, because they have exclusive access to all this super cheap oil, that comes out of the ground in Saudi Arabia. So look, there will be companies, or take Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, can they live without a solid data strategy, without a CDP or whatever? Yeah, I think so, because Coca-Cola adds life, right? I mean, that's going to be around. So there are, of course, other companies, but for the vast majority of companies, if you don't have a data strategy, you're toast, right?
For customers who don't have data today, large enterprise customers, do you think it's too late for them to get on this data train through IoT or other means? Um, or can they release products to market to collect data? Are there other solutions for them?
Well, first of all, remember there's different types of data, right? So there are companies that don't have good access to consumer data, but they have really good
Mm,
access to, right, supply chain data, right, or
mm,
HR data, right?
mm,
And so you can certainly leverage those as competitive advantages.
mm,
But even within a domain, say customer data, if you don't have the ability to get access because you don't have direct interaction with the customer, think of a big CPG company, right? That has to distribute through the, retailers.
mm,
So, one way is to use your bargaining power to get the retailers to share data with you. Okay.
mhm,
And, Procter and Gamble can do things kind of like this with the Walmarts of the world. The other is, you set up some direct communication with the customer through social media, through membership programs and, loyalty schemes and other kinds of things. So sort of
mm,
leapfrog, and then also, of course, go direct to consumer. So,
mm,
if you look at the Dollar Shave Club, right, this is a direct to
mm,
consumer alternative channel that, you can use rather than say, Gillette. Okay. So that's another way. And then, your core product itself can become a place where you can start to collect data. So if you look at
mm,
something like, Caterpillar, right? They make, tractors and so forth. Well, if you're making a tractor, I mean, you can put sensors all over that thing, right? And
absolutely.
then once you put sensors all over that thing, you can start to provide advice, just like General Electric was famous for this, but you can start offering that farmer, all sorts of advice. But not only that, you can become a reseller, right? Because now you're in this primo position
Mm,
to ingest data, to learn, and then figure out what the pain points are of your customer. And a lot of those pain points you're not going to be able to solve, but someone else will be able to solve. And I
mm,
think the biggest mental shift that a lot of companies have to make is to think of themselves not as these product companies, just kind of, I'm going to make something, I'm going to sell it. No, you've got your foot in the door. You've earned the trust of the customer. You have the ability to ingest data from the customer, and also you have the ability to resell stuff to the customer. So
mm,
you need to make yourself into, an app store. You need to make yourself into a vendor or reseller, right? And so the boundaries of the firm are in flux. I mean, Amazon's a perfect example of this, where they used to buy the books and sell the books, but they would use FedEx and so forth. Now, right, they don't use FedEx, they use their own thing, but then they don't buy the books, somebody else buys the books, and then they've got this whole IT architect infrastructure which they used to supply internally, and now they supply it externally. So when you break down the value chain of a company and you realize that you can make or buy in almost infinite number of configurations, and you bake into the organization the capacity to change, right, those linkages almost in continuous time, then your organization, I think, is prepared to succeed in a changing environment.
amazing. Amazing. This is fantastic. There's two major takeaways, Greg. The first one is in this transformation, your organizational structure is super important, right? It's come out through everything you've said. And how you organize your company so that data is democratized is super important. And then the second one is having high quality, unique data, both. It's not just the quality of data, it's the uniqueness of the data is what's going to differentiate you going forward, at least in the next couple of years. Talk a little bit about the future of work and how you see that unfold.
Yeah, I mean, one of the metaphors that I use is this idea, right, where you go from some process which is almost entirely human to one that is almost completely automated, but you pass through sort of this, augmentation stage, right? And so, an example, I mean, there's so many examples, but we could think in terms of, accounting, right? So people used to, when they trained accountants back in the 1920s, they would just add numbers, add numbers, add numbers, and you'd get 3 years of education adding numbers. And then, when you finally figured out a way to add numbers without, with a very low error rate, they would say, you're a CPA. Okay. And then you'd have these human number adders, right? And so once we invented the calculator, well, we didn't say, okay, we don't need accountants anymore.
Yeah.
Right? We don't need anybody to count anymore. Well, we don't need anybody to count anymore, but we do need accountants. But the
Yeah.
accountants use Excel, right? They don't actually add numbers, right, by hand. So the level of sophistication of their job, went up, right? And so now they're not thinking about, okay, how do I just do the same thing over and over and over again? They're like, okay, well, what kind of depreciation schedule should we use, right? And then of course, if they find themselves always using this depreciation schedule, well, then they can just automate that into their accounting software and so forth. And so I think you know we go through this augmentation stage, and so we chip away at what we need the humans to be doing. And I think we're seeing that like in trucking. I mean, I think there's 2 to 3
Mm.
million truck drivers in America, and I think everyone agrees that at some point in the future, we don't know when that is, these trucks will be pretty much autonomous from pickup to drop off, like from loading dock to loading dock. But it's not going to happen in this binary fashion. I think that's the reason why people were pessimistic about automation initially, is because they were like, wow, how are you going to do this in one fell swoop? Well, no, what we're going to do is we're going to have automation over certain stretches, like the highway, and then the humans are going to take over, right? Once you get to the more complex environment, the one that the machine learning hasn't quite figured out, right? Like you can imagine in
Indeed.
Mumbai, right? You got ox carts and stuff. Like, no, they're not, right?
Yeah. Or,
Sand Hill Road,
you don't have aux carts anymore, but still, I agree with you that
you know,
traffic is complicated.
right? So, you know, whatever. There are parts of India that still got some ox carts, right? So you're not going to use that, right? No Tesla. You push the button and go home, right? So it's going to be gradual, but right, it's not like we're going to have humans waiting at the exit ramp to jump into the car. I mean, I think we're going to have trucks that will be controlled remotely, right? So we'll have, truck drivers working from their basements or working from offices. And they may even be bosses, they may be in Hyderabad, driving trucks in California. Maybe there may be a little too much latency there. I don't know, right? But
No, but I get what you're saying.
but
There's
but
going to
then
be
but
a
then what'll happen is
different way.
as the algorithm starts seeing, because it'll
Yep.
record all of the stimulus and all of the response, all of the what the trucks see and what the driver does, it'll gradually start chipping away at it. And you might get to the point where this remote driver in an office somewhere gets called in only for a 10-foot stretch of road somewhere, you know? And so then we're saying, well, okay, if these drivers were, say, in a union and they didn't want to lose their jobs, that whole process could just be slowed down, and and it would take forever for this to happen, or you'd need a completely new company to come in and displace them. So so for you to make this transition, you have to have a workforce that is capable of taking on new tasks in continuous time, right?
Mm.
So, you learn your job, and then you amortize whatever you learned over, a 6-month period, and then you learn new stuff. And so we need to train people for that higher level, right, thinking, which enables them to redeploy their know-how as much as possible. So teach people redeployable stuff, and then have it, you give their mental architecture the capacity to modularize what they learn so that they can, evolve in continuous time. The idea of like taking a worker, here's your job description, and you're going to have this job description for 40 years. I mean, that's not going to work.
That's amazing, Greg, because I think this is almost a message to every HR department in the world. You have to be screening for candidates that have flexibility in their mindset, right?
Absolutely.
You can't be hiring, it's a cultural thing. Or you have, if they don't, you got to be retraining your workforce to have that mindset. Um, so flexibility is both now in the workforce and how you structure your organization.
Which means that
Um,
the educational systems have to teach people first and foremost how to learn.
oh, absolutely. Yep. That's totally true. I think our all our education systems have to teach flexibility, adaptability, how to learn, and how to learn fast, right? From what you're saying. So that comes back to me right now because with artificial intelligence, what you're saying is that in all of our jobs, we have to develop higher order thinking skills,
Mhm.
higher order skills. And so AI is going to help us develop those skills, right? Like even if I just think about strategy consulting, which I had been doing for a long time, the things like competitive analysis, etc., is no more going to be just a table with a few different aspects, right? Your competitive analysis now has to be a lot more nuanced, a lot more higher order in thinking, right? So as a strategist, no more can you get away with making rudimentary tables or comparing annual reports. Today AI will do all of that for you, right? So how do you develop the higher order thinking? How do you get to that 3 levels higher in your strategic thinking? And I think it's going to push the human race to be better, right, at what we do. So I love what you just said. Any other comments on work, Greg, before I take on a few more topics with you?
Yeah, I mean, we can take that same approach whenever you have an employee doing the same thing, right, repeatedly, then that's something that you can probably take away from them, right?
Mm,
That you can automate. And so what we need to do is we need to have like and this sounds terrible if you interpret it incorrectly, but we need to have a Taylorism for the ideas economy, right? So remember, Frederick Taylor was someone who went into the factories with his time motion studies and tried to figure out like, okay, how do we get more productivity out of these factory workers? And I think that's has a bad reputation because it's not like the employees got to participate in the increase in productivity in the form of higher wages necessarily. But the idea is that I want, as an employee, I want somebody in my organization to feel my pain, to understand my pain.
mm,
And I want them to say, hey, you know what? We noticed that you are, you know, spending 10 minutes of your day, logging in. I think we
yeah.
got a way of fixing that. Or, I've
Yep.
noticed that you spend all this time, trying to, make sure that the logo is on your PowerPoints. Well, we can fix that. And most organizations they don't have people that are walking around, either literally or virtually trying to figure out what the pain points of the employee are. And I have this idea that your employee is your customer because every single day that they show up for work, they are buying what you're selling. Because what you're
Mm,
selling is you're selling a value proposition. You're selling them, this work environment, and they are paying for it with their time and effort. And just like somebody can cancel their their subscription to your newspaper, or stop buying your gasoline or whatever whenever they feel like it and move to a competitor, your employees can get up and leave at any time. We don't have slavery anymore, so people can get up and leave. And so you need to be super conscious of making sure that they are getting the best deal that they can get, right? Because your
makes sense.
supplier is your customer, your employee is your customer, your
Yep.
your complementers are your customer, your investors are your customer. Like, everybody's a customer now.
It's true. It's totally true, Greg. I love it. As a company today, your customer base expands beyond just your regular customers to all your stakeholders. And that's a really nice way of thinking about your position in the company. So I want to try to summarize some of the key takeaways, Greg, that you've brought out today for AI transformation, right? And once I finish that, please add in things that I may have missed. So, as our companies go into this new world in the next couple of years, the first thing is that it begins with mindset, right? You can either look at the transformation as something to be curious about and excited about, or you could be scared of it, right? And it's better to be curious and excited because that gets you to embrace it. And the second part is you got to look at how your organization is structured, because in this new world, data is going to be your competitive advantage. And that data may be sitting in many different silos. And if your organization structure doesn't solve for those silos, even if you have the best algorithms, you're not going to be able to develop the right models. So, sorting out your organizational structure is really important. Third, making sure you have access to unique data sets is also critical. And the fourth part is about your workforce, ensuring that you hire people or you train your workforce to be flexible, right? In how they work, how they train, how they learn. The flexibility is going to be super important in the future. And finally, thinking about how do you improve the experience of the world around you, your customers, your stakeholders, using this new technology of AI is going to be critical, right? So these are some key things that our leaders need to be thinking about in terms of the transformation. Anything you want to say, Greg, that I may have missed, or an additional point that you would have?
Well, the last thing would be, all of this requires leadership,
Yeah.
right? None of
Yeah.
this happens automatically.
So, Greg, we're at the end of our hour here. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope our audience takes away important insights that they then deploy in their organizations. As we close out, I would love to ask you to talk a little bit about your podcast, Unsiloed. Greg here has an amazing podcast, and true to his personality, his podcast, Unsiloed, is about exploring many different points of view and many different topics. So, Greg, tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Well, it's something I've always wanted to do, and it builds on a lot of things that I do in my classes. And the idea is that just as organizations are split up into silos, right, our fields of inquiry are also kind of split up into silos. And we have academic disciplines, right? And a lot of the insights and innovations that happen typically come at the edges or at the interfaces or the gaps between these different disciplines. And so I try to explore them. And I guess the goal of the podcast is to create the next generation of generalists, because I do think that, the generalists are the ones that are taking over the world. We tend to think that, if you have a, super deep knowledge of, machine learning algorithms, that you're going to be super successful. Yes, and there will be a few of them, right? Sam Altman, right? Genius. Okay. Absolutely. But I think that in today's world, having the ability to roam widely across a bunch of different disciplines is going to be the superpower that is going to help you to succeed, both in business and in life and in science. And so my goal is to inspire people to maybe add a little bit more generalist knowledge and to get in the habit of approaching different disciplines with confidence that they can, learn a bit about it, right? And not to be intimidated. Okay. Because a lot of times people think, oh, I'm not a science kind of person. I'm not even going to go there. Well, yes, you can, right? You can go there and you can learn a bit. Um, and if you find the right people and you ask the right questions, then, and that's my goal, is to just show people, hey, I can go and just ask a bunch of questions and read a bunch of books, and I can, I can play ball in that field, and you can too.
Amazing. So, for our audience, I encourage all of you to become generalists, and please listen to Greg's podcast, Unsiloed, where he explores various topics and shows you that a generalist can have specialist skills in certain areas. So, thank you, Greg, for doing that. I listen to your podcast and I absolutely love it. And your line of questioning is amazing. So, thank you so much for being here with us today, and take care. And Hope to see you again in another episode.
Thank you, Arvind.
Lots to think about there, as always. Arvind, can you summarize some of the major points there from your interview?
Like I said in the beginning, everything Greg says is insightful, and he totally lived up to that, right? Throughout the conversation, there were some couple of key insights, but it's hard for me to pull them out because everything he said was so good. I am going to try to summarize it, right? I do think there are 3 things people should pay attention to. The first thing, when it comes to AI transformation, data is critical. And if you have access to unique data sets, if you have access to unique data, that is going to be a competitive advantage as an enterprise. So when you look at AI transformation, please take stock of what data you have, whatever the data is and how unique it is. That's going to be your competitive advantage. Now, the second thing that he said, which was almost even more important than the data part, is that the way your company is organized is going to directly be proportional to how successful you are in this transformation. And the reason for that is, if your company is organized in silos, and if there are leaders who are safeguarding the data in their silos, even if you have the most powerful AI algorithm, it can't use all the data because there are people kind of having power centers holding on to the data, right? So you got to democratize the data across your organization. And the democratization of data happens only when humans allow it. And if you can organize your company so that data flows freely, and data is not seen as some kind of a power play, right? A lot of leaders do this in companies. They hold on to data within their different silos because it's a power play. And breaking those silos and reorganizing your company so that data flows freely within the organization, I think is going to be the second most critical thing about AI transformation that Greg brought out. So as leaders, you got to pay very close attention to your organizational structure. And the third part about AI transformation is to think of it not as a step change, but a series of augmentations, right? So for example, if you want tomorrow to automate your HR processes with artificial intelligence, rather than think of it as a jump where you're going to replace all humans with AI, you got to have an augmented approach, right? It's similar to the AI RoboCop, where it's a human plus AI working together. So that's how it's going to happen, right? AI is going to augment some of human skills, and over a period of time, that augmentation will increase, right? Where humans will develop new skills. So that's the key thing about AI transformation to keep in mind. There's going to be a series of augmentation of skills that AI is going to take away from humans. I think those are the 3 things that stood out. But this particular episode, I highly recommend everybody to really listen to the entire episode and not just go to the highlights, because everything he said was super insightful, and loved the conversation with him.
Fascinating stuff. All it leaves me to say is thanks so much for bringing your expertise. As always, great talking to you.
Same here, Stuart, and hope you get a break from the cold weather.
Oh, that would be nice. If you like our podcast, please like, subscribe, or tell all your friends. I'm Stuart Black, and see you next time on Unpacked.